Well, thank you all for coming. I know that it's not easy, Friday afternoon, very jammed, no parking, but thank you, we really appreciate the effort. So I'm sure that most of us here today wouldn't mind learning a trick or two about making money in the stock market, right? Well, I know for a fact that there's a lot of interest in China particularly. Now, why China? The China market is without doubt one of the most attractive markets in the world today, with its attractive valuation and strong economic growth. In the final quarter of 2012, China's GDP grew 7.9%, up from 7.4% in the third quarter. This marks the first rise on year growth in the Chinese economy since the fourth quarter of 2010, supporting the view that the economic powerhouse is on the rebound. It is against this dynamic backdrop that Alan Voon releases his latest book, making it very timely. In his book, Alan will give you a step-by-step guide on how you can trade Greater China with a winning edge using American Depositary receipts, which are foreign securities listed in the US stock market. Now let me give you all a short introduction on our author here today. Mr. Alan Voon is not your average fund manager or investment analyst in a big investment firm. He actually started as a retail investor, just like you and I here today. What sets him apart though is his huge passion and love for investing. He really treats it as the love of his life, and he eats and sleeps dreaming about his shares, which might explain why Alan is still single despite being so attractive and eligible. Well, needless to say, all that passion and hard work definitely paid off for Alan, and he has now established himself as the guru in warrants in Malaysia, and has in fact written 2 other books prior to this one. He has also been invited to sit on the investment committees of international funds all over the world. Alan's achievements, of course, did not go unnoticed, and soon enough, John Wiley and Sons came knocking at Alan's door, asking him to come up with a book for the global market. Alan, being the go-getter that he is, obviously stood up to the challenge. So now, Alan was faced with writing this book, but he had a problem. He's the guru in warrants in Malaysia, but who's interested in Malaysian warrants around the world, right? I mean, he was writing a book for Americans. So he had to come up with a topic which would pass John Wiley's stringent selection criteria. After all, John Wiley's author list boasts names like Mark Mobius, Jim Rogers, and George Soros. And now, of course, Alan Voon. So Alan decided to write about ADRs, and John Wiley is now convinced that Alan can be the face to tell Americans how to make money in Greater China. So without further ado, I shall welcome our author today, Alan Voon, to tell us a little bit more about his book.
Thank you, Miss Chloe. This gorgeous lady here on my MC today is actually Miss Malaysia World 2011, Chloe Chen. Thank you, Chloe. Okay. Thank you, friends, supporters, for coming in today to this little book launch on. It's a long weekend. I think a lot of people are on leave and things like that. I'm honored that many of you are still taking up times off to be here today. Today, the launch of this ADR book in Malaysia on investing in Greater China. Okay, before I begin, can I ask if any one of you who actually invested overseas? No? At least got a few. So I can start talking. So you recognize this guy? Who don't? Superman, right? Li Ka-shing. I think he was just, I think Forbes just estimated his wealth to be around US 30 billion recently. And needless to say, this guy likes to invite me for free lunches. Free lunch in stock market, okay? Of course, his flagship company is Hutchison One Power, which I'll explain to you a little bit later. How you can get invited to Uncle Lee's lunch without paying. Okay? So, actually back in university when I was still studying, I had this professor in finance. He always tells us that, okay, there's no free lunch in stock market. Okay? no free lunch in stock market. But how can that be true? I challenge him. There must be some market inefficiency somewhere in the world that you can find free lunches here and there. But then, being a die-hard fundamentalist, he always say that no, there's no way. So over the next many years, I strive to prove him wrong. So today, I managed to come up with this idea, and to prove that there is actually very relatively riskless way to make money if you know how to find those opportunities. And it's difficult to believe because in today's well-connected market, you can have a press of a button, global news on the internet and things like that. So it's difficult to imagine why there is a free lunch for you to have, because there are a lot of sharks and crocodile out there. We play stock market, we know. Some syndicate will push the shares up. Okay, you go to the crocodile. Okay, they'll eat you up. But actually, if you know how to swim properly, you can actually find your way. Okay, so in this book, I introduced the concept that retail investors like you and me can actually make some money relatively risk-free. Not all the time, but when the time comes, you must know how to get them. So, before I proceed, I have to introduce a concept of ADR. ADR is American Depositary Receipts. In short, it is something, it's like a shares listed in US, but the shares primary listing is not in US. So it's a foreign securities listed in US. So it could be, for example, Malaysia very own Genting Berhad. They actually sponsored an ADR listed on the US exchange. I think one of the OTC market. So it is not only China stocks or Hong Kong stocks is available in ADR. In fact, back in the 90s, when the Malaysian market was red hot, there are many Malaysian ADRs listed in the US. But of course, nowadays maybe only left the Naga and Genting, two more active ones. There are less Malaysian ADR listed in US nowadays. So just now I mentioned that this Li Ka-shing gave me opportunity to earn a relatively risk-free money from the market. And now I'm gonna give you an example. This is in chapter 1 of my book, and I'll just give you one of the many cases. In August 2010, after the Asia market closed, okay, when the market closed, company usually they don't announce their company-related news like making announcement on their profits or material contracts. They typically announce it after the market close, which is after 5 in Hong Kong, or after 4 in Hong Kong and after 5 in Malaysia. Whatever it is, these informations are being released post-market. That means the market close, the closing price of Hutchison 1 pound on the 5th of August would not have reflected the piece of news that would coming out with this earnings release. So what Hutchison did was it reported an earnings of 6.45 billion Hong Kong dollar, and which is a 12% growth in earnings, which is nothing spectacular. But then, during that time, most analysts, the market in general, was expecting Hutchison to actually report a decline in profit. And that was actually readily available information that you can find in most financial websites reporting Hong Kong stocks. You can actually get the consensus estimates. In this book, I'll teach you how. So, but Hutchison, that actually reported an earnings that actually beat the street forecast by a mile. And that is significant, because the street was estimating a decline in profit, and you actually reported an increase. Actually, the background was that the 3G business in Europe for Hutchison then was turning around, so it was caught analysts by surprise. So when this happened, next day the stock market will fly. As this Hutchison shares. So, not known to many, Hutchison also has an American Depositary Receipt listed in the pink market of US. Okay, in US, Most people are familiar with New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, American Stock Exchange. These are the main exchanges. But there are also a lot of over-the-counter market like OTC Bulletin Board, which is owned by NASDAQ. And then there is this pink sheet, which is owned by, they're known as pink market. These are over-the-counter. Over-the-counter means that they are just traded like stock market, but they are not an exchange. It's computerized trading and it's matched by these market makers and brokers in the US securities trading system. So, traders who are alerted to these news that was reported after the market closed in Asia can actually react and buy or sell the ADR depending on the news that came out, whether it's a bullish one or a bearish one. When the US ADR failed to respond to the piece of news. When I say fail to respond means the ADR, the Hutchison ADR did not go up as expected. Sometimes the bigger companies like PetroChina and China Mobile, they also have ADR listed in the New York Stock Exchange. These big companies, they have more followings. PetroChina, China Mobile, they are those are the biggest companies in China. So their news will be immediately out and well digested. So it's not so easy to make money from those big China state-owned corporations. But with Superman's Hutchison, you still have a little chance. So these are the information that we can find in the book of the quote, this ADR symbol, the US stock symbol and things like that, and the exchange ratio. One ADR represent 2 Hutchison 1 power shares. So these ADRs are issued by US banks who actually use Hutchison 1 power shares as an underlying securities and then actually issue ADR and trade them in the US stock exchange. So here I actually show you that on August 5th, you can see that on August 5th, the Hong Kong market closed at 53 Hong Kong dollar, Hutchison 1 pound. And on the same day, later in the evening, the price of this ADR was traded between 1369 and 1350. That is within the range of the price that was traded in the Hong Kong earlier in the day. So this piece of news come up, the earnings surprise. So the next day, naturally in Hong Kong the share price will shoot up. It looks like it went up 10% or so. So on that day, on the 5th of August, in New York, in US trading time, you could actually buy the ADR at around 1360, 1370. And next day, when the market opened, after the Hong Kong share has gone up, you can see that the share price shot to as high as almost $15 in US. So that is a one-day rise of almost 10%. And this is what I call free lunch, because it is relatively risk-free, because this kind of news you already know, and you know it will happen the next day. Especially when you are following the counter. So you can see the chart, actually the line is actually the ADR price. So we can see that the next day it shoots up. It's not so clear here, but in the book this will be illustrated in greater detail. So what the concept we are trying to introduce here is to take advantage of price mispricing. So it occurs when major price moving news are announced after the market of primary exchanges close. That includes China and Hong Kong, which is the main topic that I cover in this book about Greater China, but also include companies like Genting Malaysia, which actually has a sizable US operation now, because now they have Florida, they have New York. So anything that happened in the US market hours that affects the casinos, license, whatever of Genting operation US, they will have impact on the share price the next day of Genting Berhad. So you can actually buy ahead or sell ahead in the US ADR market. So the news can be on a specific company and it can be on the industry as a whole if we know how to interpret them.